I stood on the outskirts of Pripyat, watching the sky grow darker. It was early April 1986, and life in the small town surrounding the Chernobyl nuclear power plant was quiet. I was a worker at the plant, spending most of my days around Reactor 4, never thinking much of the dangers that came with it. But as the days rolled on, something started to change. It began with the dreams. I woke up night after night, drenched in sweat. The same image haunted me, a creature towering and dark, standing in front of me with wings spread wide. Its eyes glowed red like burning embers, staring straight into my soul. In these dreams, I couldn't move, and the only sound was the slow, deliberate beat of its wings. Every night, I hoped it was just a nightmare, a figment of an overworked mind, but I wasn't alone in my fear. Whispers spread around the plant and the town. Others had seen it too, and we began to call it the Blackbird. It was no ordinary bird. From the descriptions shared over hushed conversations, it resembled nothing we had ever seen before. Some described it as a man, large and hulking, but with massive wings sprouting from its back. Others spoke of its eyes, glowing red like warning lights in the dark. We didn't know what it wanted or why it appeared, but it came with a presence that made the air feel heavy, like something terrible was just waiting to happen. The town was small, and word of the Blackbird spread quickly. People began to see it lurking near the plant, hovering in the sky above Reactor 4. I heard stories of people receiving strange phone calls. They would answer, only to hear static or distant voices, whispering things no one could understand. My colleagues were shaken. They spoke of a deep primal fear gnawing at them, like they were being watched, stalked. Some said it was an omen, a warning of something catastrophic. One evening, as I walked home from the plant, I felt it. The air had changed. The usual calm of the forest surrounding the town was replaced by an eerie silence. No birds, no wind, just stillness. I glanced up at the sky and saw it, a large, shadowy figure with enormous wings circling the power plant. It was unmistakable. The Blackbird. My heart raced, and I froze, unable to tear my eyes away. It flew low, gliding through the air with a grace that didn't match its size. For a moment, I thought it looked at me, those burning eyes locking onto mine. Then, Jit vanished into the clouds. That night, the dreams came again, but they were different. This time, the Blackbird didn't just stare at me from afar. It came closer, its wings beating against the ground as it approached. I tried to scream, to run, but my legs wouldn't move. All I could do was watch as it loomed over me, its red eyes burning brighter and brighter. Then, with a deafening roar, everything around me shattered into chaos. The next day, I overheard some of my coworkers discussing similar dreams. One mentioned receiving a phone call in the middle of the night. When he answered, all he could hear was a deep, distant voice whispering his name before the line went dead. The tension in the plant was palpable. We all knew something was coming, but none of us knew what or when. The days passed, and the sightings of the Blackbird grew more frequent. It no longer just hovered over the plant, it seemed to be everywhere. Some saw it perched on rooftops in Pripyat, others claimed it flew over their homes, casting an ominous shadow in the fading evening light. We couldn't escape it, and the fear became suffocating. On the night of April 25, 1986, I was working a late shift at Reactor 4. The plant hummed with the usual noise of machinery, but there was an unsettling feeling in the air, thicker than ever before. I glanced out the window, and there it was again, the Blackbird. It circled above the plant, its wings cutting through the dark sky. I turned away, trying to focus on my work, but my hands were shaking. I knew something was wrong. Just past midnight, everything changed. At 1:23 a.m. on April 26, 1986, the world shattered. A deafening explosion rocked the entire plant. The force threw me off my feet, and I hit the ground hard. I struggled to breathe as thick, black smoke filled the air, choking me. Alarms blared, and the ground trembled beneath me. The screams of my co-workers echoed in the chaos as we tried to make sense of what had just happened. The reactor had exploded. I ran out of the building, my heart pounding, the heat from the fires burning my skin. In the distance, I could see the flames consuming Reactor 4, the very place I had spent so many hours working. And above it, in the thick, swirling smoke, I saw the Blackbird one last time. It hovered in the air, its wings spread wide, silhouetted against the flames. Its eyes glowed red, watching over the destruction it had foretold. The town of Pripyat was quickly evacuated, but it was already too late for many. The radiation spread, carried by the wind, and the lives of thousands were forever changed. The Blackbird, the creature that had haunted our dreams, had been a warning, but none of us could understand it in time. I survived the explosion, but the memories of that day and the haunting presence of the Blackbird never left me. The nightmares continued, even as the town lay abandoned, a ghost of the life it once was. I had always heard the stories about the Honey Island swamp monster. They were whispered in small-town diners, passed down by grandfathers to their wide-eyed grandchildren, and used by locals to scare tourists who visited St. Tammany Parish. Folks called it the Cajun Sasquatch, and the older generation spoke of it in hushed tones. But I never believed in that kind of thing. Monsters and ghosts were just stories, made-up tales to keep people entertained or away from the dangers of the swamp. That was until one humid summer evening when I found myself in the Honey Island swamp. The swamp was a place of both beauty and danger, with its cypress trees standing tall. It was easy to get lost out there if you didn't know the way, and I knew it better than most. I had grown up in Louisiana, spent my childhood navigating the muddy waters, and fished from the same boats my father had. The boat I was on now was nothing special. Just a simple flat-bottomed skiff that I used for swamp tours. Tourists loved the stories about the Honey Island swamp monster, and they came in droves to hear me talk about it. I didn't believe a word of it, but I knew how to spin a good tale. La Bête Noire, I would say, making my voice low and mysterious, is a creature of legend. Some say it's half man, half beast, standing over 7 feet tall with piercing yellow eyes that glow in the dark. It walks upright like a man, but it's covered in thick hair. Its footprints are huge, with 3 webbed toes. People loved that stuff. They'd snap pictures of the water and pretend to hear strange noises in the distance. I'd play along, letting the stories feed their imagination. But after the last group of tourists had left that evening, I stayed out on the water a little longer than usual. I wasn't far from the spot where folks claimed they had seen the creature. It was always the same area, a dense, dark part of the swamp where the trees grew so close together that the sun barely broke through. I knew the way by heart, though. The water was still as I paddled quietly through the narrow channel. The only sounds were the occasional croak of a bullfrog and the soft splash of my oar hitting the water. As I approached the darker part of the swamp, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I laughed it off at first, chalking it up to my own overactive imagination. It was easy to feel uneasy in a place like this, where the silence could be deafening and the shadows seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. I kept paddling, pushing deeper into the swamp until I reached the clearing where the trees parted and the water opened up. The air smelled of mud and decaying leaves, the swamp's natural perfume. I was about to turn back when I heard something, a low, guttural growl. It wasn't the sound of an alligator, and it wasn't the call of any bird or animal I had ever heard before. I froze, my oar hovering just above the water. The sound came again, this time closer, louder. I scanned the trees, searching for the source of the noise. That's when I saw it. A dark shape moving through the underbrush. It was quick, darting between the trees so fast I almost missed it. But there was no mistaking what I had seen. Standing on the edge of the clearing was something huge and unnaturally tall, just as the stories described. It was covered in thick, matted hair, its body muscular and powerful. Even in the fading light, I could see the outline of its broad shoulders and long arms that hung down almost to its knees. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, two piercing yellow orbs that seemed to burn right through me. For a moment, I couldn't move. I just sat there in my boat, staring at the creature as it stared back at me. Time seemed to stand still as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. It couldn't be real. The Honey Island swamp monster was just a myth, a story to entertain tourists. But there it was, standing just a few yards away from me, its chest rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. It made no sound now, just stood there, watching me with those glowing eyes. I didn't dare move, afraid that any sudden motion might provoke it. Then, without warning, the creature turned and disappeared into the trees, moving with surprising speed and grace for something so large. I sat there in stunned silence, my mind racing to process what I had just seen. Slowly, I began to paddle back, my hands shaking as I gripped the oar. The ride back felt like it took forever, the swamp's shadows growing longer as the last light of the day faded into darkness. When I finally reached the dock, I tied off the boat and sat there for a long time, staring out at the water, trying to convince myself that it hadn't been real. But deep down, I knew it was. I had seen the Honey Island swamp monster with my own eyes. I've always been a night person. The shadows and the stars come out like diamonds scattered across a dark ocean. Where I live, near the edge of the forest, the nights are especially still. But sometimes, not everything is as peaceful as it seems. One evening, I decided to go for a walk. The moon was full. I'd walked this trail many times before, so I knew every bend and turn, every tree that leaned a little too far over the path, every bush that rustled when the wind blew. But tonight, something felt different. As I walked, I noticed the woods were quieter than usual. There were no crickets chirping or owls hooting. Even the wind seemed to have stilled. I told myself it was nothing, just one of those strange, silent nights. But then I saw it. At first, it was just a shadow, something moving in the corner of my eye. I turned, but nothing was there. I kept walking, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe it was a deer or some other animal. But deep down, I knew this was different. I picked up my pace, my footsteps quickening on the dirt path. That's when I heard the growl. It rumbled through the air like distant thunder. I froze. Slowly, I turned around, and that's when I saw it clearly for the first time. Standing in the middle of the path was a creature I'd only heard about in old stories, the Bargas. Its fur was as black as the night itself, blending into the shadows like it was made of darkness. Its eyes glowed bright red. It looked like a massive dog, but there was something wrong, something unnatural about it. Its teeth were long and sharp, and its body seemed to shimmer, as if it wasn't quite solid. I'd heard tales of the Bargas growing up. Some said it was a spectral hound that appeared to those about to die, a warning of their fate. Others said it was a shapeshifter, a creature that could become anything it wanted, lurking in the shadows until it chose to strike. I never believed the stories. They were just myths told to scare children. But standing there face to face with the Bargas, I knew the stories were true. The creature stood still, watching me. Its red eyes locked onto mine. I knew I should run, but my legs wouldn't move. It was like the Bargas had some sort of hold on me, like it was waiting for something. We stood there, frozen in place. The creature didn't move, and neither did I. Then slowly, it began to circle me. Its movements were smooth, almost graceful, but there was a tension in the air, like a predator stalking its prey. I could hear its growls, low and menacing, as it padded around me. I didn't dare turn my back to it. As it circled, I noticed something strange. The shadows seemed to follow the Bargas, growing darker and thicker wherever it moved. The moonlight couldn't touch it. It was like the creature carried the night with it, bending the darkness to its will. I tried to remember the old stories, hoping they might give me some clue on how to escape. Some said the Bargas was a bringer of death, a creature that couldn't be outrun or escaped. Others said it was a trickster, playing with its victims before vanishing into thin air. But none of the stories told me how to survive an encounter with it. As the Bargas continued to circle, I realized something else. It wasn't just a physical creature. There was something more to it, something otherworldly. It felt like this creature wasn't fully part of this world, like it existed in some place between life and death, reality and shadow. It was more than just a beast. It was a force, an ancient, untamed power that had slipped through the cracks of the world. Just when I thought it might attack, it stopped. It stood still, staring at me with those glowing red eyes. Then, without warning, it began to fade. Its body shimmered, becoming less solid, less real. The darkness around it seemed to swallow it whole until, finally, it was gone. I stood there, stunned. The Bargas had disappeared as quickly as it had come, leaving nothing behind but the stillness of the night. I waited for a long time, half expecting it to return, but the forest remained quiet. When I finally gathered the courage to move, I turned and hurried back home, my heart still racing. I didn't look back. I didn't know why it had appeared to me or why it had let me go. Maybe it had been a warning, a sign of something yet to come. Or maybe the Bargas was just passing through, a creature of the shadows that wandered the world, unseen and unheard by most. Whatever the reason, I knew one thing for sure. The stories were true. I had always been fascinated by cryptids, those strange, mythical creatures people whisper about but never seem to find. As a kid, I spent hours reading about Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, and the Chupacabra. But recently, something new caught my attention. The Walper Tinger. The Walper Tinger is a creature from German folklore. Some say it has the body of a hare, the antlers of a deer, and the wings or beak of a bird. The idea of this strange combination of animals intrigued me. I couldn't help but wonder, could something like this actually exist? I knew it sounded absurd, but that only made me more curious. I wanted to learn more, and I wanted to see if anyone, anywhere, had actually encountered one. So, I did what any curious traveler would do. I packed my bags and headed to the Bavarian Alps in southern Germany. This region was said to be where the Walper Tinger supposedly roamed. I wasn't sure what I'd find, but I was determined to track down some clues. When I first arrived in Germany, I was full of excitement. I imagined myself stumbling upon ancient texts or hearing old-timers tell wild stories about their encounters with the creature. I thought maybe there were secret spots in the mountains where the Walper Tinger could still be found, hidden from modern eyes. But as it turned out, things didn't go exactly as I had planned. I started by visiting small villages scattered throughout the Alps, asking anyone who would listen if they knew about the Walper Tinger. Every time I brought it up, people gave me funny looks. Some laughed, others shook their heads, and a few seemed genuinely confused. I quickly learned that most people treated the Walper Tinger as a joke. In these parts, it was just a tall tale parents told their kids or something you'd see in a kitschy gift shop, not a real creature. My enthusiasm began to wane. One day, I walked into a small tavern in a village nestled deep in the mountains. The walls were decorated with antlers, old photographs, and what looked like stuffed animals, except these animals didn't look quite right. I leaned closer to one of the displays. It was a strange creature, pieced together from various animals. Its body was that of a rabbit, but it had tiny antlers and the wings of a bird. It was labeled Walper Tinger. I asked the bartender about it, hoping for some real information. He laughed and explained that it was just a local prank. Hunters and taxidermists would create these Walper Tingers by stitching together parts of different animals as a joke. Tourists loved it, and people would buy the fake creatures as souvenirs. It was disheartening, to say the least. The more I asked around, the more I realized that to most people, the Walper Tinger was nothing more than a whimsical legend. For a while, I considered giving up. Maybe the Walper Tinger was just another made-up creature, a funny story to entertain children. But something about the idea wouldn't let go of me. I couldn't stop thinking about it. What if there was a kernel of truth behind the legend? I decided to change my approach. Instead of asking people directly about the creature, I started digging into old books and local legends. I spent time in libraries poring over dusty volumes that talked about the history of the region. I found old folklore collections that mentioned the Walper Tinger in passing, but nothing concrete. It was always treated as a mythical creature, not something real. One evening, while flipping through an old book in a library near the mountains, I stumbled upon a passage that caught my attention. It wasn't about the Walper Tinger specifically, but about strange sightings in the Alps. The passage described hunters in the 18th century who claimed to have seen animals with bizarre features, rabbits with horns, birds with the feet of hares. These sightings were rare, but they were taken seriously enough to be recorded. This was the first real clue I'd come across, and it reignited my curiosity. Maybe, just maybe, there had been something real behind the Walper Tinger myth. Perhaps the creature wasn't exactly as it had been described in the stories, but what if there was some sort of animal, maybe an undiscovered species, that people had seen and exaggerated over time? I continued my research, looking for more mentions of strange creatures. I found a few other vague references, but nothing solid. Still, the idea kept gnawing at me. I began hiking deeper into the mountains, exploring remote areas where people rarely ventured. I didn't expect to find anything, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there. Then, one afternoon, something strange happened. I was hiking along a narrow trail when I heard a rustling sound in the bushes. I stopped and looked around. At first, I saw nothing, but then I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. Something small and quick darted across the path and disappeared into the undergrowth. I only saw it for a second, but it was enough to make my heart race. It had looked like a rabbit, but there was something odd about it. Its ears seemed too large, and I could have sworn I saw tiny antlers on its head. I stood frozen, staring at the spot where it had vanished, trying to convince myself that I wasn't imagining things. I never found solid evidence that the Walper Tinger exists, but that brief encounter convinced me that there's something out there. As I stood in front of the old orphanage, memories flooded back. The building was crumbling, covered in vines and shadows. This was the place where I grew up, a home filled with laughter and friendship. But it was also the place where I lost my best friend, Bree, in a terrible fire many years ago. I pushed open the rusty gate, which creaked loudly, echoing in the silence. I walked through the broken door, my heart racing. Dust danced in the fading light, and I could almost hear the whispers of children playing. But now, everything was still and empty. I moved through the hallways, remembering our adventures, I could almost see Bree's bright smile and hear her laughter. As I reached our old room, I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. I knelt by the window, where we used to sit and dream about the future. Tears filled my eyes as I thought of all we had lost. Suddenly, I felt a cool breeze sweep through the room. I looked up and gasped. There she was, Bree's ghost, glowing softly in the dim light. Her hair floated around her like a gentle mist. I could see her face clearly, a mix of happiness and sadness. In that moment, I knew she had come to say goodbye. I reached out, but my hand passed through her. She smiled at me, and I felt warmth spread through my heart. I remembered all the good times we had shared, the love that filled our lives even in the hardest moments. I wanted to tell her how much I missed her, how much she meant to me. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared, Bree's ghost began to fade. I felt a deep ache in my heart, but I also felt peace. She was free now, no longer trapped in this old building. I whispered my goodbyes in my heart, knowing that she would always be with me, watching over me. As the darkness settled around me, I left the orphanage one last time, carrying her memory with me. I turned back to look at the old building, now silent and still. I knew that I would never forget her. She had been my best friend, and her spirit would live on in my heart forever.